Hi everybody, welcome to the Carl Fisher House. This house was built in 1927 at the behest of Carl Fisher. I think we see some familiar faces, so some of you guys know who he is already. But he was thank you. He was a developer here in Montauk, and he built a bunch of buildings that you know throughout town. A lot of them are Tudor style, and they're pretty gorgeous. So today we have Dave Cataletto giving a lecture about Prohibition in Montauk. Dave Cataletto is a middle school teacher at East Hampton. He teaches history and English, and he's a East Hampton Town trustee and one of the founders of the Amagansett Life Saving Station Museum. So we're really excited to have him tonight.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for having me here tonight. I'm honored to be in this historical landmark of Montauk. I want to thank Hugh King, who's helped me with my research for tonight's talk, and he's always inspired me to pass on our town's rich heritage. And I'm also going to kind of follow in his footsteps. When he does his talks, he always gives a little quiz at the end. So now you have to pay attention. All right? Can you hear me in the back? Yes. All right. So I find it easier to grasp history when you're actually in a historical setting, as we are tonight. And as you know, the original builder and resident of this beautiful home was Carl Fisher, a larger-than-life American. In a nutshell, Carl Fisher had a big part of creating Montauk into a destination, and he played an intricate role in tonight's talk, if behind the scenes. His vision of Montauk, the Miami of the North, I believe, was intertwined with the optimism and charisma of the Roaring Twenties, the heyday of the Montauk Rum Runners, when anything was possible. Now hold on to your seat, because we're about to take a Rum Runners high-speed boat ride through the Roaring Twenties in Old Montauk. Montauk, our favorite drinking village with a fishing problem, has had a long love affair with the bottle. So when that romance was threatened during Prohibition, cheers, from and East Hampton Historical Society, they only do grape juice, so this is perfect. When that romance was threatened during Prohibition from 1920 to 1933, Long Island's alcohol aficionados took matters into their own hands, spawning one of the most creative black market rum-running operations this side of the Atlantic. It's hard to imagine now, but a century ago, at the stroke of midnight, January 1st, 1920, Montauk, along with the rest of the United States, switched from wet to dry. The Volstead Act and the outlawing of booze actually passed through Congress as the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. Literally overnight, the quiet little backwaters of Montauk turned into the Wild West on speedboats and fast cars. Locals made more money in one night than months fishing. Fewer places in the United States were better suited for the illegal smuggling of liquor than Montauk. For the next 13 years, Fort Pond Bay, Lake Montauk, Gin Beach, Napig Harbor, and practically every other hidden cove or secluded beach in Montauk became infamous scenes of hundreds of thousands of cases of illegal liquor coming ashore, mostly whiskey, called hooch back then. Montauk rum runners chugging out to Rum Row in the middle of the night always had at least two men on board, one to drive the boat and one to be on the constant lookout for the Coast Guard or hijackers. So if the lookout yelled "Coasties" and pointed, the captain would repeat and point so the lookout knew he had heard. So tonight, I'm going to be the lookout and you're the captain. So when you hear me yell "Coasties" and point, you've got to yell it back and point. All right? So let's practice. Coasties! 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 All right, we're going to be a good crew here. Now, before we dive into the Montauk rum runners and the bootleggers and the birth of the modern Coast Guard, let's take a step back now, way back. Okay, we're going way back, 3,500 years to Egypt in a hidden tomb deep in the Valley of the Kings. The 18-year-old King Tut's mummified body is sealed up and hidden away, as we all know. But nestled beside the body of the boy king, sitting in the dark, for the next 3 millennium was enough booze to fill Montauk's white liquor store. Giant 6-foot clay amphoras, each filled with a different wine, traced to the most famous vineyards across the Mediterranean. In China, 200 BC, the Han Dynasty Emperor Qi Shi Huang was buried with a golden rice press for making sake. The wine press was encrusted with precious gems, pearls, and diamonds. 1100 years ago in Norway, Viking chieftain Redbeard Wolfling was buried in his Viking warship with 30 barrels of strong wheat beer. So hang in there, I'll get to our wily Montauk rum runners before you can shuck a clam. But the point is, throughout history, almost every culture has had a preferred alcoholic brew. That was an important part of their society and culture. People have raised their glasses to celebrate marriages, victories, confirm treaties and unions, and honor memories with the toast. Cheers! Cheers. All right. Any guess what the oldest form of intoxicant was? Wine or beer, right? But archaeological scientific data points to mead as the world's oldest alcohol refreshment. Mead, as you probably know, is made with honey. Researchers in China have found evidence of the substance inside 9,000-year-old jars. Gradually, wine and beer replaced the honey elixir because grain and grapes became more abundant and cheaper than honey. Ever since Homo sapiens figured out how to spike our drinks, it seems we quickly tried every plant or animal to get our buzz and shift our state of mind even for a short time. But way before Prohibition in the Roaring 20s, Long Island had already been an underground route for contraband hundreds of years ago in the colonial times. To skirt paying duties to the Crown or His Majesty, goods were smuggled into the same backwaters the rum runners from Prohibition used. Coveted trade goods like whale oil, whiskey, and guns were landed illegally to avoid taxes in Montauk. Montauk has been a haven for smugglers and rum runners for centuries, outwitting authority and avoiding taxes. In letter after letter to the English king, Earl Belmont, the colonial governor of New York in 1699, called Long Island, quote, a great receptacle of pirates. The American Revolution had its roots in these unfair liquor taxes decades before British stamp or tea taxes. Montauk and East Hampton have always been a haven for free and independent thinkers, not allowing unfair laws to stand in our way. And so it was again in the Roaring 20s. Coasties! Coasties! All right. Tonight, we are going to focus on 13 riotous years called Prohibition that turned Montauk into a major artery for illegal rum runners and a battleground across its beaches and bays and hidden backwaters that local fishermen knew in fog, storms, or in the darkest nights. Local fishermen used their intricate knowledge of the waterways to make their families' fortunes. To this day, there are more than a handful of Montauk families that can trace their leg up in society to an old gutsy rum-running ancestor. Maybe some of you here tonight. Besides smuggling booze, many locals figured out how to brew their own alcohol in backyard or basement stills. Supposedly, there were stills set up all over from Montauk to Wainscott. These home brewers were called bootleggers. The name goes back to when they would hide bottles of booze in their boots, hence bootleggers. But the rum runners, these Robin Hoods of their day, knew the South Fork nooks and crannies, its hidden creeks and back roads in the darkest of nights. They knew the tides and read the skies better than our iPhone apps today. Okay, let's go back for a minute. Here's what created Prohibition in the first place. The 13-year-old noble experiment was rooted in more than a century of anti-alcohol activism. Compared to today, inhabitants of what is now the United States drank excessive amounts of alcohol throughout the colonial period through the Civil War, 8 times as much as we do today. One reason was that distilled low-proof liquor was safer to drink than water in many places because alcohol kills germs, right? A fun fact, the Pilgrims on the Mayflower drank mostly beer, not water. On August 18, 1829, 14 men organized the Sag Harbor Temperance Society. It was one of the first temperance societies on Long Island. Why? Because for 100 years, Sag Harbor was the second biggest port to New York City, right? Due to the thriving whaling industry. Sag Harbor's waterfront was a bustling, riotous place, often overrun by sailors when over 100 whale ships might be in port. Tattooed Maori whalers jostled with Shinnecock and Montauk harpooners. Dozens of different languages and currencies were used in over 20 bars and saloons along Main Street, Bay Street, and throughout the outlying villages. Sounds like Montauk now, right? The numerous liquor dealers and other businesses peddled all manner of vices to the whalemen and workers in other shore trades. Often Sag Harbor Jail was so full of drunken sailors that the overflow was chained in the bottom of numerous churches like the Old Whalers Church. In the following decades, the nationwide temperance movement shifted from encouraging modern drinking and cleaner living to pushing for laws that restricted or banned alcohol altogether. Carrie Nation is an example of the famous American temperance advocates. She was a grandmother famous for going around using a hatchet to demolish bar rooms, and Carrie inspired hundreds of other temperance leaders. In the years leading up to Prohibition, massive marches and demonstrations in all large cities and small towns against alcohol were orchestrated by the three biggest dry coalitions. These were the Women's Suffrage Movement, the Anti-Saloon League, and believe it or not, the KKK. These three big groups band together and blamed American society's problems on alcohol and immigrants. And all three coalitions pushed for stricter immigration laws, primarily against the Irish and the Italian immigrants. And possibly the law that the majority of Americans were against passed into law in America in January 1920, and Prohibition had begun. Right after the 18th Amendment's ratification with the Volstead Act, Long Island newspaper, The Long Islander, devoted much of its January 17th front page to the achievement. Its editors boasted that every American today should be prouder of his country than ever before. Our nation is the beacon light of the world. It will be a glorious consummation and one which none will rejoice over more generally 5 years hence than the habitual users of intoxicating beverages themselves. They were completely wrong. Most people felt a God-given right had been taken away in a country that claimed freedom and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Long Islanders began stockpiling alcohol before the ban and then quickly learned to acquire more of it legally and illegally. Overall, there was little support for Prohibition, especially in the Northeast. America was a hard-driving, free-living society pitching full steam ahead into what would become the Roaring '20s. Women's dresses were almost up to their knees, for God's sake. Attitudes about drinking weren't about to change, and there was no broad support programs in place to curb alcohol consumption. Bars went underground or went into back rooms called speakeasies or blind pigs. Legitimate alcohol manufacturers were driven out of business, but the demand didn't go away. This meant, of course, that illegal manufacturers and suppliers began to pop up everywhere, and organized crime in America quickly seized on an easy way to make ridiculous piles of money that would never be taxed. What used to be random gangs spread out throughout the 5 boroughs in Long Island became a highly interconnected coalition that eventually stretched across the U.S. to all the major cities. For the first time, bringing the underworld throughout the United States together like never before, joining these mobsters and mafia into a powerful coalition known as the National Crime Syndicate, nicknamed Murder Incorporated, with leaders like Al Capone in Chicago, Lucky Luciano and Bugs Siegel in New York, all rising to power due to Prohibition. New York City was the heart of the Roaring '20s in the Jazz Age and the gin joint capital of America, and the preferred haunt of mobsters engaged in the illegal supply of alcohol. Long Island, with over 1,000 miles of unpatrolled coastlines, became the city's willing partner in illicit trade. Suddenly, Montauk men like the Duriers, the Tuthills, Grimes, Pitts, Tumas, McDonald's were side by side with some of New York City's toughest gangsters. Did I skip one? Mysterious rendezvous in the dark of the night at some desolate beach soon occurred nightly. Locals could make $50 in one night. From an old East Hampton Star article I read, it seems each side quickly learned the hard way to stay armed and dangerous at all times. It wasn't uncommon for a bullet-riddled body to be found on Montauk's quiet back roads and beaches. Rum runners typically carried what weapons they already had at home: their hunting long guns, shotguns, and rifles, and I assume plenty of fish filleting knives were kept handy. The city slickers carried a wider assortment, but by far the most popular was the Thompson submachine gun. The gun had become infamous in World War I for its deadly barrage of 20 rounds per second. Dubbed the Annihilator by American doughboys, gangsters simply called it the Chicago typewriter. One of the first and most famous rum runners was 45-year-old Bill McCoy. Yes, the famous real McCoy, due to his booze always being top quality. Bill McCoy would inspire and set the standard for rum running for the next 12 years. McCoy, a charismatic captain and boat builder, saw prohibition as an easy way to get rich. In 1921, Bill McCoy's first run was 1,500 cases of rye whiskey from Nassau in the Bahamas to Montauk. Bill dropped anchor of his 100-foot schooner just 3 miles off Montauk Point, the international limit for free trade. U.S. laws were only enforceable up to 3 miles off the coast back then. It soon changed. Within a day, boats of all sizes from Montauk had purchased all McCoy's high-quality booze for top dollar. Bill, flush with cash, sailed back to the Bahamas. Then he again crammed his ship full of top-grade whiskey, sailed back north to Montauk. And this is what his schooner might have looked like. This process was repeated again and again as Bill bought more ships to create a small armada of rum runners. He started a pattern that soon hundreds of coastal rum runners mimicked. November 15th, 1923, McCoy and his famous fast schooner Tomika encountered U.S. Coast Guard cutter Seneca off Montauk Point, just inside territorial waters. The coasties attempted to board, but McCoy chased them off with machine gun fire. He tried to run, but the Seneca fired an exploding shell just off her hull, a warning shot, and like that, Bill McCoy's days as a rum runner were over. He served 9 months in prison and then gave up rum running because, in his own words, the mob pushed all us honest men out of business. Soon, just off the 3-mile mark, became known as Rum Row, or the Rum Line, and ships waiting were called Rum Row. The Rum Line was extended to a 12-mile limit in 1924, which made it harder for smaller, less seaworthy vessels to make the trip. Soon, a floating city of boats and barges and schooners began to grow. They waited for souped-up Montauk fishing boats who would zip out, pay up, and zip back to some hidden beach. On calm days, even seaplanes would land and fill up on booze. A 1924 captain's log from Rum Row read, "Often at night, the sound of sailors singing old sea shanties drifted through the fleet of anchored ships. The men competing and entertaining each other, no doubt with the help of bottled contraband. Each night, a flotilla of small craft would sneak out of Fort Pond Bay, head straight for the rum line, and bring back loads of bottles back to shores of Gin Beach, Shagwan, Oyster Pond. The cargo was then either transported to the many speakeasies across Long Island and New York City, or was stashed in Montauk's sand dunes for safekeeping. Bottles were tied up 8 in a burlap bag called a ham, and a small brick of salt was placed in the bottom of each. If a rum runner was being chased, he could ditch the hams in shallow water, which would sink to the bottom thanks to the salt brick. But within a few days or two, the salt dissolved and the hooch floated back to the surface, where the fisherman would be waiting. Like I said, Rum Row became a floating city, especially in the summer and holidays like Christmas, when booze was in high demand in every coastal town. Neither the FBI nor the Coast Guard had any jurisdiction or control outside of American waters. Freighters, schooners, private yachts, fishing boats, and watercraft of all types turned into booze haulers. Larger vessels would sit just outside the old 3-mile limit and wait for customers to pull alongside. Another new innovation of Prohibition was the speedboat. Yes, there were already powerboats, but nothing like the souped-up, super-fast vessels that reached unimaginable speeds during Prohibition. Rum runners and the Coast Guard competed for faster engines in order to outrun the other. Henry Clay Foster, in a 1924 Motorboating magazine article, wrote, "With a focus not on drink but on speed, how smugglers' want for faster boats quickly spurred innovation. The Jersey Seabright skiff, a popular boat design, went from a rowing dory to a mile-a-minute craft in about a year's time in 1921. The Zippier boat soon became popular with sportsmen and the Coast Guard. One boatyard in Greenport made a lucrative business out of building high-speed rum-running boats. Some of these soon had 2 spare engines and a bulletproof pilot house. The same boatyard also built high-speed pursuit boats for the Coast Guard, but bribes from the rum runners persuaded the shipwrights to construct the Coast Guard boats to run 3 knots slower. The rum runners had way more money than the fledgling Coast Guard to spend on improving engine power. For the rum runners, really the sky was the limit, and that's exactly where the new engines came from. After Rolls-Royce car engines were not fast enough, smugglers bought Liberty V8 aircraft engines. Believe it or not, Montauk smugglers bought the 400 horsepower V8 engines from the federal government from the surplus after World War I for $100. Now, the rum runners could easily do 40 knots, while the Coast Guard's fastest cutter was 25 knots. At the start of Prohibition, there were many famous chases when the rum runners outran the Coast Guard. Now, just quickly, the U.S. Coast Guard was established in 1790 by Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton. It was first called the Revenue Marine Service under the Department of the Treasury. They were trying to save money, right? Protecting their treasure, mainly to protect merchant ships off our coast. It later became the Revenue Cutter Service. In 1915, the Revenue Cutter Service, the life-saving service, merged to create the Coast Guard. Coasties! At the start of Prohibition, the Coast Guard was completely overwhelmed. It had only a few ships and fewer men to man them. The federal government had to throw more money into the Coast Guard, and soon the Coast Guard spending doubled. And it worked. With better funding, better intel, faster boats, they started catching up to these rum runners. Beginning in 1924, the service's small boat fleet in the Northeast mushroomed. The Coast Guard had an assortment of patrol boats now, inshore patrol and harbor cutters. In addition, soon the Coast Guard began repurposing seized rum runners for pursuit and apprehension. During Prohibition, more than 450 seized vessels were repurposed and flipped. The name of the vessel was always officially changed to a number, but the boat was generally referred to by its original name. One such famous boat out of Montauk, the rum runner, was the famous Black Duck, or CG-808 out of Montauk. The capture of the Black Duck by Captain Alexander Cornell was one of the most publicized events during the Rum War. After her conversion to a Coast Guard vessel, she served her country well. An incident in which the Black Duck played a major role was in the attempted capture of another famous rum runner, the Artemis, which had already been captured 3 times and purchased back each time by the owners. Sometimes they would go on auction and they'd just buy them back. On August 20th, 1931, Captain Cornell was patrolling off Montauk Point for rum runners. He spotted a shadow in the dark night, shut down his engines, and ordered the lights out to wait as the boat passed. But by the time Cornell recognized Artemis and her intentions, it was too late. Artemis rammed the Black Duck, who was unable to get her engine started in time to avoid a collision. Planking from the Black Duck was ripped away, and she lost part of her guardrail. The crew was almost knocked overboard. Cornell ordered machine gun fire to open up on the Artemis as she sped away. The Black Duck pursued her while firing machine gun rounds, and with a strong searchlight revealed cases of liquor on her deck and in the water. The Black Duck lost the chase when the Artemis laid down a heavy smoke screen and zigzagged away into the darkness of the Montauk night. The next morning, the Coast Guard combed boatyards and hospitals in New York and Connecticut. At Greenport Hospital, they discovered 2 men with gunshot wounds. Meanwhile, a Coast Guard plane near Orient spotted several skiffs on the beach piled with liquor cases, with people taking them away through the dunes. By the time agents arrived at the beach, the skiffs were completely empty. 1926, the East Hampton Star wrote, "The Coast Guard cutter Seminole on Saturday afternoon spotted a rum runner in the Sound off Montauk, which appeared to be reaching for the open sea. A shot across the bow failed to make the stranger heave to, and 10 more shots were fired from the cutter before the launch obeyed an order and came alongside of the Seminole. Thus captured, several machine guns and a Coast Guard crew were placed on board the well-known rum runner Pacific. In all, 7 rum runners and 1,800 gallons of whiskey were captured by Coast Guard from the speedboat Pacific," end quote. The Coast Guard's duty was to cut the flow of illegal liquor near its source. According to Jeanette Edward Rattray's book, Ship Ashore, acting as strongman in the Prohibition fight was the most thankless job ever assigned to the Coast Guard. That duty caused some friction with the residents of eastern Long Island for the first time in the service's history. Add to the fact that a rum-running captain could make several $100,000 a year in comparison with the Coast Guard commandant who made just $6,000 annually, and the seamen would make $30 a week. So bribes were not uncommon. The Coast Guard relied on hard work, excellent recon, and big guns to get their job done. To add to the problem, the Coast Guard had other duties and often had to let a rum runner go in order to assist a sinking vessel or some other emergency. Also, many times the local Coast Guardman would look the other way if a friend or relative was a rum runner. In order to counter this, the Coast Guard brought able-bodied seamen from the Carolinas, who also were familiar with the water, right? They would fill Army trucks with these men, and also the train, then starting at the Rockaways would drop off these new recruits at all the Coast Guard stations all the way to Montauk. So they didn't know anyone. It was easier, to keep them honest. At Montauk's Navy Beach, conversation could be cordial during the day. Coast Guardsmen and fishermen swapping stories about the weather. One such encounter when a Coast Guardman bummed a cigarette off a fisherman and said, "Thanks, Charlie, see you tonight." The fisherman responded, "Not if I can help it." Gin Beach, however, is not named after the illegal gin that often washed up there, as I originally believed. Maybe some of you did too. Instead, the word gin refers to an Old English word meaning to graze cattle. So Gin Beach was originally near pastures where cattle and livestock were kept. That's like way back in colonial times. Speaking of cattle, cow shoes or heifer heels were made from blocks of wood carved to look like cow hooves. Montauk bootleggers, moonshiners, and anyone else looking to avoid getting caught while transporting and manufacturing booze would sometimes strap them to the bottom of their shoes and throw off police and federal agents. And as you know, there used to be a lot more cattle and horses in Montauk, right? A well-known family, Montauk family, the Grimes, were also connected to the rum running. The Nova Scotian Edward Grimes came to Montauk in 1918 working on the bunker fishing boats. He didn't like that work much, and once Prohibition kicked in, and he went back to Nova Scotia and with a few friends bought an old cod fishing boat. They filled it with Canadian booze and sailed down to Rum Row off Montauk. After Mr. Grimes sold the liquor to local rum runners, they sank the schooner and rowed ashore. Next, they took a train back to Nova Scotia and started the whole process over again. See, cod fishing boats were cheap back then due to the recent collapse of that industry. And this happened with a lot of families, local families who kind of settled here. Later, Edward Grimes got into the other side of the rum running as a fast cigarette boat. The Grey Gander, a sister boat of the infamous Black Duck. One dark night while he was pulling up to a dock and noticed things didn't look quite right, he dropped his mate off to check if all was clear when a barrage of gunfire erupted from the darkness. Edgar was shot twice in the chest, but somehow sped off and escaped away into the safety of the night. They made it to a veterinary friend in Montauk who patched Edgar up. He survived and ended up marrying the daughter of a Montauk man he sold illegal liquor to. His grandson, Jim Grimes, is an East Hampton Town trustee and last year's Grand Marshal of the St. Patty's Day Parade. He said I could share this. In November 1924, the East Hampton Star noted what it called the first real attempt to stop the river of liquor flowing from Montauk. Prohibition agents set up a roadblock on the one road out of Montauk on the Napeague Stretch and searched every suspicious vehicle that passed. Agents seized 11 automobiles and arrested 13 for liquor smuggling. Here's a way they would kind of sneak liquor around. This was a big bust. Agents also confided in the Star that they suspected the smugglers were so organized that even the East Hampton female telephone operators were on the smugglers' payroll because phone tips seldom made it through. In Montauk, the Coast Guard appeared to be tripping over rum runners. F.D. Warren, the captain of the Hither Hills Coast Guard station, spotted and apprehended Oliver Beckwith, the son of a local fisherman, with 115 cases of liquor as he was landing in his dory onto the beach. However, a powerboat with another 150 cases trailing the dory escaped into the night. An article in the Star stated, Fish dealers in Montauk are complaining of the shortage of fish and lobsters, and it is believed that the rum running is one of the main causes. The boatmen of the area are making $5 a case for transporting liquor ashore, an attractive change of pace from the uncertainty of fishing. Long Island's most glamorous speakeasy was the Island Club on Star Island, where the Montauk Yacht Club sits today. Built by Carl Fisher, a friend of Al Capone's, the club became a haven for those rich and parched, like John Barrymore, Earl Flynn, Ernest Hemingway, and then made Mayor of New York, Jimmy Walker. The Island Club was a harmless fisherman's club by day, but transformed itself into a speakeasy at night, complete with loose women, gambling, entertainment, and liquor. There was, I think, part of it is still there, a stone guardhouse at the head of the causeway leading out to Star Island. And if the feds were seen coming, those in the booth could say one word over the telephone line, and in 5 minutes, the place would transform itself back into a fisherman's club. Famously, the mayor of New York, Jimmy Walker, was in that club one night when the district attorney's men pounced suddenly and without warning. The mayor got through it by throwing a dish towel over his arm and masquerading as a waiter. And he got out of there. The Coast Guard finally started getting faster boats, and one early morning in 1926, just after dawn, a surfcaster and his son at Shagwan Point watched a Coast Guard boat chasing a stripped-down fishing boat and slowly gaining on him, until the captain of that boat had his mate throw the boxes overboard into the bay one at a time, which allowed the fishing boat to speed up and get away. Later that day, the surfcaster and his son were out in the water on a rowboat collecting the boxes on the bay bottom, just where the two had seen them dropped. May 20, 1929 at sunrise, the 40-foot speedboat Marjorie, loaded with 500 hams of champagne and whiskey, raced toward the entrance to Great Pond in Montauk, closely pursued by Coast Guard Patrol Boat 124. The Coast Guard ordered the rum runners to stop. Instead, she accelerated and was outpacing the patrol boat when the Coast Guard captain ordered the crew to open fire with the machine gun mounted on the deck. The rapid-fire machine gun quickly disabled the fleeing Marjorie, and the speedboat grounded at the entrance to the harbor. 3 guardsmen rowed over and found the decks piled high with bags of booze. 2 men surrendered immediately, while a third attempted to escape into the dunes before Coast Guard gunshots halted him. All 3 were taken into custody. East Hampton Star, April 17, 1925, headline, liquor catch containing 250,000 in rum found on estate in Montauk. The article went on, gun battle at Third House. Montauk early last Saturday morning, resulting in 2 rum runners being wounded, 3 officers being shot dead. Eventually, 6 arrests were made and discovery of 250,000 in cases of liquor. Federal and county officials are now investigating the shooting. Troopers on horseback found large catches of liquor hidden in a nearby swamp. This was also the birth of tricked-out super-fast cars like never seen before anywhere in the world. The Need for Speed was worth millions of dollars to the car loaded with booze that could outrun the coppers on the back roads of East Hampton. Another busy port, Greenport, was perfect for smugglers. Had a good harbor where boats could tie up after the heavy lifting was done. First-rate repair facilities, so it didn't take long for the Coast Guard to figure this out. In 1924, established Coast Guard base there. And rum runners frequently tied up at the opposite side of the same dock. In fact, Claudio's restaurant in Greenport was a famous speakeasy where rum runners at high tide could unload liquor directly from the boat into the bar. 100 years ago, a common sight in the fall on the East End was a potato truck piled high with spuds, major crop back then. However, a potato truck driving quickly with a large Model T packed with men following closely behind was not as common. Prohibition police noticed this as the vehicles blew past them in Wainscott, October 31st, 1928. Realizing the Model T was following the lumbering truck instead of trying to pass it, the officials took off after them. As the agents began to overtake the vehicles, the men in the Model T following the potato truck realized trouble was coming, quickly pulled away, and disappeared down the road. The potato truck was pulled over. At first appearance, the truck seemed to be filled with thousands of potatoes, but tucked under the spuds were 300 cases of assorted liquors. In the fall, potato, apple, and pumpkin trucks were popular with smugglers heading west into the Big Apple. Believe it or not, pirates in East Hampton didn't end with Captain Kidd when he buried his treasure on Gardiner's Island. Booze pirates and hijackers were also a huge threat for Montauk rum runners. Solitary gangs on fast boats would pull up to a big ship at anchor at the 3-mile limit, pretending to want to buy liquor. Once both boats were tied up, the pirates would pull out Tommy guns, rob the crew. By mid-decade, the incredible amount of wealth on Rum Row brought in a vicious cycle of violence. Land-based gangs now took to the water as pirates. And what used to be a cordial relationship where buyers would bring out food and bring back mail was now deadly serious. It was a time when Montauk folks stayed away from the beaches and off the roads at night. The results could be tragic if an innocent citizen happened upon a transaction taking place on the beach at night or came into contact with a truck, usually complete with an armed gunman loaded with liquor on a dark, lonely road. Gun battles between bootleggers and federal agents made headlines, and a number of lesser-known hoods were found dumped along Long Island's quiet roads, their bodies riddled with bullets. One of the most famous cases of liquor piracy took place on September 1924 off Indian Wells Beach in Amagansett. Rum runner turned liquor pirate Owen Cannonball Baker and his crew posed as U.S. Custom officials. They pulled their ship up along a merchant schooner boarded her and found the vessel filled with 10,000 cases of top-shelf whiskey. Once aboard, Cannonball Baker quickly shot and murdered the captain and his son. The liquor was quickly offloaded and the now empty boat set afire. So despite the romance of rum runners in history, there were plenty of brutal and savage murders. Open water chases and gun battles left shipwrecks and stray bottles of liquor along our beaches and bays. In 1926, 3 East Hampton high school girls were down at Egypt Lane one morning when they found a washed-up rowboat filled with cases of whiskey, wine, and champagne. They reported to the police, but by the time the authorities got there, the rowboat was empty. Local lore says that there was a big uptick in high school beach parties for the next few weeks after that. Sometimes it was the elements that interfered with the smooth delivery of the contraband, providing a bonus to local residents. Just before Christmas 1922, a schooner named Madonna V out of Halifax, Nova Scotia, ran ashore near the Napaid Coast Guard station during a nor'easter and began to break up in the surf. As the rum runners abandoned ship, the schooner's cargo, several hundred cases of choice liquor, was in danger, but not for long. From Rattray's book, lifelong teetotalers and even deacons of the church risked pneumonia in the December surf to bring it ashore, prompted no doubt by the inherited custom of wrecking, which is salvaging valuable items from shipwrecks, and an old New England principles against waste of any kind. On a quiet August night, 1931, off Montauk Point, Samuel W. Borman, a fisherman, was plying his trade when a rum runner raced past, following closely by the Coast Guard in hot pursuit. A small object flew out of the rum runner and plopped into the net Borman was starting to haul out of the water. Among the fish caught in the net was a small brown notebook. Curious, Borman plucked it out of the net and soon realized that what he had in his hands, an incredibly valuable and dangerous object. Any guesses what it was? Value because the object was a notebook with a neatly typed list of all the codes that the local rum runners used to communicate with one another. This is an actual photo of it. Dangerous because if anyone knew he had it or if he turned it into the authorities and word got out, it could be a death sentence for Borum and his family at the hands of powerful gangs who dodged the U.S. Coast Guard daily. Borum, a staunch Methodist, did not drink, so prohibition wasn't a hardship. However, he didn't want to be caught in a dangerous situation, so he dried out this code book and stashed it away. Decades later, Borum's grandson found the code book, now a harmless artifact from a bygone era, and brought it to the local historical society. The notebook revealed a treasure trove about the rum runners' activities and that the smuggling rings had landing sites that stretched from Cape Hatteras to Orchard Beach, Maine, and everywhere in between. The book had over 1,000 codes from locations to the size of liquor barrels. Overall, it showed how extensive the criminal world had become during Prohibition. It says small barrel rye, large barrel rye. Block Island has a code. Barnegat Light. Brandy has a code. On the M page, there's like Montauk. All local harbors around here, all in the book. By the early 1930s, the tide had turned against Prohibition. The Great Depression was in full swing, and the U.S. was strapped for cash. Legalizing alcohol and taxing it could bring in sorely needed funds. The federal government had gone down a long, winding rabbit hole that ultimately was a catastrophic failure. After his 1932 election, President Franklin D. Roosevelt ended prohibition and with it the profitability of liquor smuggling. For 13 years, locals here in Montauk had made the best of a bad situation. Like the Robin Hoods of their day, they saw an injustice and the money to be made from it, as generations of locals had done before them. 100 years ago, on a night just like this, Montauk rum runners would have been chugging into the dark of night for a rendezvous with destiny. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, so here's the quiz, all right, so if you're paying attention. All right, so number one, how long did Bill the Real McCoy go to prison? 9 months, yeah, you got it. What was the V8 Liberty engine originally built for? Airplanes. Good. What was the speakeasy on Star Island called? The Island Club. Nice. Who started the original Coast Guard in 1790? Alexander Hamilton, right. And last, which U.S. president ended prohibition? FDR. All right. Awesome. So, so I thought it would be fun to add another layer to tonight's talk. What might it have sounded like, right? Sailing north for Montauk on Bill McCoy's schooner, you probably would have heard some old sea shanties. Most all crews on early sailing ships sang sea shanties. Sea shanties were work songs sung to help keep time among groups of sailors, coordinate physical movements like hauling ropes, raising sails, and relieve the boredom of long, repetitive tasks. So thanks to Hugh Brown and Al McCready, they're here tonight to help me out as part of the crew. They're going to help me sing just a couple old sea shanties that probably have not been sung in Montauk in a very long time. So these are kind of rowdy. So if you need to go to the bathroom or get a drink, feel free to walk around. If you need to go out and have dinner plans, you can take off. But you're also, if you want to refill your drink, definitely. But also, you're kind of part of the crew, so sing along if you kind of can catch the chorus. There's a lot of repetition. And there were basic three types of shanties. There was a short haul shanty for quick jobs that needed a quick pull, so the rhythm would have that type of rhythm. There was the halyard shanty. Halyard was for pulling up the sail, so it'd be kind of a little bit of a longer rhythm. And then there was a capstan shanty. And a capstan is like a real kind of a big wheel that would be on a larger ship, and you'd walk around, you'd hoist up an anchor, hoist up a sail. This might take hours sometimes, so that's more of a longer, kind of a longer rhythm. So we're gonna do like 5 songs, just a little variety. They're like 3 minutes each. So, so let's come on up, boys. Let's do it. All right. So this is called Montauk Harbor. Montauk Harbor is the king of all the harbors. Montauk Harbor is king of harbors all.
Montauk Harbor is the king of all the harbors. Montauk Harbor is the king of harbors all.
Somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh, bully-ta-la-la,
somebody oh.
Montauk whiskey is the king of all the whiskey. Montauk whiskey is the king of whiskeys all.
Montauk whiskey is the king of all the whiskeys. Montauk whiskey is the king of whiskeys all.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Montauk skippers are the king of all the skippers.
Montauk skippers are the king of skippers all. Montauk skippers are the king of all the skippers. Montauk skippers are the king of skippers all.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Montauk sailors are the king of all the sailors. Montauk sailors are the king of sailors all.
Montauk sailors are the king of all the sailors. Montauk sailors are the king of sailors all.
Somebody oh, Johnny, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Somebody oh, somebody oh,
Bully-ta-la-la, somebody oh.
Bully-ta-la-la,
We are somebody oh.
guys got a smile. You gotta have fun. You're having fun. All right, this is called Bully in the Alley. It's from the 1700s. It's a capstan shanty. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alleyway. Hey, bully in the alley.
Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Bully down a shimbo now.
For 7 long years I courted little Sally Way. Hey, bully in the alley. And all she did was diddle and dally. Bully down a shimbo now. Well, help me,
Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Bully down a shimbo now.
I left my Sal and I went a sailing.
Way, hey, bully in the alley.
Signed on a big ship and I went a whaling. Bully down a
Shimbo now.
Oh, help me,
Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Bully down a shimbo now.
If I ever get back, I'll marry little Sally.
Way, hey, bully in the alley.
Have 6 kids and live on Shinbone Alley. Bully down a
Shimbo now.
Oh, help
Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Bully down a shimbo now.
well,
Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley. Bully down a shimbo now.
This is fun. This is John Kanakanaka, and it's because of a lot of Hawaiian whalers, and nobody could pronounce Hawaiian names. So all Hawaiians were called John Kanakanaka.
So this is from the like Hawaiian whaling heyday, early 1800s. It's a short haul shanty. I heard the old man say, Kanaka to ride. Today's a holiday. John
Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
We'll work tomorrow, but not today.
John Kanaka to ride.
Today, it's a holiday.
John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
Oh, to ride.
John Kanaka to ride.
Bound for Wolfram Bay.
John Kanaka to ride.
We're outward bound at the break of day.
John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
We're a Yankee ship with a Yankee crew,
John Kanaka to ride.
and we're the boys that push her through.
John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
When we get to Frisco Bay,
John Kanaka to ride.
we'll pay off our ship and draw our pay.
John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
Oh, 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 away.
John Kanaka to ride.
We'll haul away and make your pay.
John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride. To ride, oh, to ride. John Kanaka to ride.
This is our Romy Bully Boys, a captain shanty. It's from the 1750s. I think it was like the French and Indian War period, actually. What's that?
I'll sing you a song, it's a song of the sea. Row me, bully boys, row. I'll sing you a song if you'll sing live with me. Row, you bully boys, row. Row, me bully boys, we're in a hurry, boys. We've got a long way to go.
And we'll sing and we'll dance and bid
Farewell to France. Row, me bully boys, row.
where the captain lives, where the first mate is plating the captain aboard.
Row, me bully boys, row.
Well, he looks like a peacock with pistol and sword.
Row, me bully boys, row. Row, me bully boys, we're in a hurry, boys. We've got a long way to go.
And we'll sing and we'll dance and bid farewell to France.
Row, me bully boys, row.
Well, the captain likes whiskey, the mate he likes rum.
Row, me bully boys, row.
Well, us sailors like both, but we can't get us none. And it's
Row, me bully boys, row. Row, me bully boys, we're in a hurry, boys. We've got a long way to go.
and we'll sing and we'll dance and bid farewell to France.
Row, me bully boys, row. Well, farewell, my love, it is time for a row. Row, me bully boys, row. The old blue Peter are calling me home. Row, me bully boys, row. Row, me bully boys, we're in a hurry, boys. We've got a long way to go.
And we'll sing and we'll dance and bid farewell to France.
Row, me bully boys, row.
Last time. And we'll sing and we'll dance and bid
Farewell to France.
And it's
Row, me bully boys, row.
yeah, you guys know what's up. And this is a Howard Shaney. This is a really old one too, but it's called Drunken Sailor. You guys know this one, right? What do we do with the drunken sailor? What
do we do with the drunken sailor? What do we do with the drunken sailor?
early in the morning?
Way head up she rises, way head up she rises, way head up she rises, early in the morning.
Put him in the longboat till he's sober. Put him in the longboat till he's sober.
Put him in the longboat till he's sober, early in the morning. Way head up she rises, way head up she rises, way head up she rises, early in the morning.
Put him in the cabin with the captain's daughter.
Put him in the cabin with the captain's daughter. Put him in the cabin with the captain's daughter, early in the morning. Way head up she rises, way head up she rises, way head up she rises, early in the morning.
That's what we do with the drunken sailor.
That's what we do with the drunken sailor. That's what we do with the drunken sailor, early in the morning.
Here we go.
Way head up she rises, way head up she rises, way head up she rises, early in the morning.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.